Welcome to our panel discussion today on the topic of building security, privacy, and trust in data security. Today, I have with me 4 esteemed panelists. Let me introduce them. First off, Marcus. He's the head of Cybersecurity Department for Institute for Infocom Research under A*STAR here in Singapore. Next, we have Kelvin Ng, Deputy Director of Technology in Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore. Next, we have Doug Winchie, Assistant Director, Cybercrime Threat Response from Interpol. And last but not least, we have Zheng Wei, Co-founder and CEO of Accredify. Okay, so let's kick off today's panel discussion. The first topic that I would like to pose to our esteemed panelists, perhaps it's a topic that has been on a lot of our audience mind. The topic that I would like to invite you to share is actually on the question about IoT. Do you view IoT as a threat to personal data? And do IoT devices expose more vulnerable entry points to your organizations to malicious attacks from hackers? So I'll first start off the discussion by posing this question to Marcus, right? So over to you, Marcus.
Thank you, Unji. Okay, after years of talk about how explosion of IoT adoption will bring a change to our lives, just like how internet changed the world, we are finally seeing it happening. While the rise of IoT has brought many conveniences and opportunities for innovation, IoT device security also poses many challenges. For a start, unlike your typical enterprise IT equipment, IoT devices are often deployed in the field. This means that the threat actors can have physical access to your IoT devices and possibly perform reverse engineering on the device to compromise it. In order to keep the cost low, a lot of IoT devices are powered by low-end CPU, which lacks features like Trusted Platform Module (TPM), making it difficult to implement higher level of security. Most will just implement a single layer of security control, such as username and password. And to make the matter worse, some users will just use the factory installed default username and password. And some system integrators may also do that in their clients' devices for ease of future maintenance after installation. So how often do you keep the firmware of your installed IoT devices updated? How often do your IoT system integrators come to update the firmware of the IoT devices they install for your organization? These are important questions as more and more IoT devices are connected to organizations' enterprise network. Although most of these devices are connected to the company's OT network, but with increased connectivity between the OT and IT networks, all these connected IoT devices increase the attack surface. Security breach in any of these IoT devices will become an entry point to the organization's network for threat actors. As IoT devices become more prevalent, particularly in industries like medical devices, automotive and equipment manufacturing, the risk associated with security breach increased tremendously to the point where people's lives may be put in danger. Looking ahead, with the increased adoption and development of higher speed networks such as 5G, 6G, proliferation of IoT devices and machine-to-machine communications, the rise of mobile edge computing, coupled with the tremendous amount of data generated from these IoT devices, which are used for AI analytics. Many of this data involves personal identifiable information, PII. Any security vulnerabilities in the installed IoT devices will definitely pose a serious risk to protection of personal data. At the moment, how to make data privacy better protected and secure in a more decentralized edge computing environment is still an open and challenging problem. Remember that the organizations will need to comply to the personal data protection law and regulations in the countries that they operate in. And on top of that, any security breach will also result in significant reputational damage to the organization. Hence, IoT security is an issue that all of us should take seriously. If not, instead of Internet of Things, IoT may very well become Internet of Threats. Thank you. Over to you, Unchi.
Thank you, Marcus. Now let's perhaps invite Doug to share more insights on this topic. Coming from the Interpol point of view, does Interpol view the IoT being the new frontier where cyber threat actors could potentially penetrate into organizations? So let's invite Doug for Interpol to perhaps enlighten us.
Thank you so much for the question. And look, I agree that IoT presents great opportunities and great benefits to communities, individuals and organisations. But it does come with risk and it does come with threat. We've seen, over the last couple of years, the emergence, obviously, of IoT and the adoption of IoT, and everyone likes a new gadget. For example, I walked into my son's bedroom last night, turned on the light. Of course, the light didn't turn on. I had to whisper into the device he had in the room to turn the light on, which subsequently turned on. So these types of conveniences and I guess and pushing the boundaries are really great for people. But we've also seen, the original IoT devices with very little security really attached to them and being connected to, just personal Wi-Fi at home and things like that, where we seem to see a lot of devices emerge quickly in the domestic market, and obviously it's gradually moving across into the commercial environment. It presents opportunities and for threat actors to expose and exploit not only the device, but then obviously the networks that they're connected to and linked into. I think for organisations, we need to be careful around the threat. We need to be conscious of the threat, and the fact that we're talking about this threat and these issues is very important because, at least we're walking a path that we're at least aware of the potential challenges and issues. Supply chain attacks in relation to coding manipulations and particularly when a lot of the coding these days is pretty much taken pieces off the shelf and joined together to obviously develop applications. We see in IoT devices common code across various devices, obviously tailored to that specific device and the engagement and links it's going to have within organisations. And so there is a chance and a vulnerability in relation, just in the sheer exploitation of potentially supply chain in the development of that code. And that could actually emerge years and years after the development of those types of, the rollout of those types of equipment. I think for organisations too, they need to think about third-party devices and how vulnerable their organisations are to IoT devices that may be held by an employee, I should say, or maybe a customer or person that comes into that environment and there's a handshake arrangement with that device, and then obviously it's starting to connect into those networks. IoT devices, yes, they're a privileged luxury, almost an exceptional luxury now, and I think tailoring new devices to the market is an ongoing challenge and innovation for organisations that are in that space. But we've got to be conscious about security. I think from the previous speaker, the issues around default passwords, a significant challenge, a significant risk, and particularly a lot of these commercial organisations that are providing these devices are sharing the information that these devices are out there too. And there's quite a bit of information around how these devices developed, built, and it provides a raft of opportunities for potential threat actors to exploit. We're expecting over 40 billion IoT devices connected into the internet by 2025. So, a significant issue, a significant consideration, and a significant threat for us all as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. So now I'd like to perhaps invite Kelvin to perhaps share with us some insights from what CSA is seeing here in Singapore with regards to the risk of IoT adoption. Kelvin.
Thank you, and Onji. Kelvin here from CSA. Indeed, like what Marcus and Doug have talked about, the kind of security threat that IoT bring to the industry and bring to the market or even to the consumer is indeed something that CSA is very worried about. And we did not start now, but in fact, actually in 2019, we worked with Netherlands government to come up with an IoT landscape study report, which in the earlier finding, we actually identified two main risks. One of the risks is that we find that compromised IoT, as what Marcus has mentioned, is something that actually compromises consumer privacy and data. That is something from a consumer point of view that's very important. And that sort of attack actually will have a lot of significant damage to the consumer, which they have the least defense to take on such kind of issue. Second is actually at a wider economy front. We think that the increasing landscape of IoT devices because of the transformation, digitalization of, for example, in COVID, everybody is going on digital. There's a lot of IoT devices in the market, and these devices can be easily hijacked. Why is it easily hijacked? It's because of the low form factor and security is not really in place, and they are easily taken advantage to be used and actually controlled to do DDoS attack on other victim server. So this is a big problem we foresee. And come back to date, actually, at the point of time, we identified three main challenges from the IoT landscape report, probably to share with you. One is actually from the principal governance and legislation angle. We think that we need to do something as a national agency for cybersecurity. The kind of governance that we need to have from IoT legislation need to play in is something that we think that is an important factor. And how are we going to go about governing and legislating something from the IoT? Because Singapore is a small market size. So we work on things like certification and standard to make sure we bring up the kind of cyber hygiene level in the international community together as a total effort from the world point of view to make sure we drive IoT at upstream, the cybersecurity is taken care of. So this is one of the standards and security that we look at before we act on a regulation approach. Second is the ecosystem development. In terms of actually, if we want to keep up to this state of making sure there's no threat to all this IoT and IoT keep improving by itself, we really need the innovation of the whole ecosystem. In terms of actually how to make sure the whole product life cycle is taken care of, not only built for the on-start. And cybersecurity never stopped there because there's a lot of patching, there's a lot of loopholes subsequently found. So it's a life cycle support that needed, which in today's world, you can see there's a lot of supply chain attack that's taking advantage of this life cycle issue. On the third point is that actually, in terms of the technicality of all these IoT devices, we find that actually things like the internal firmware OS is something that's anchoring. And we are also trying to look into IoT today. There's so many devices. There's no unique identification IoT. So we are working with the international teams in terms of research and development into making sure subsequently we can identify IoT products to give them an identity and actually to make sure firmware OSs sitting on top of the IoT devices, even they have small little footprint, there's a way to make sure all these are taken care of. So this is part and parcel of the whole three areas that we are looking at from the IoT landscape study that we launched in 2019. And until today, I would say it's still very relevant. And we are taking this framework to iron out all the issue to make sure we address the threat that we are seeing in the market for these IoT devices. That's all from me. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelvin. Thank you. Now, over to Silvi. Being the sole panelist from a vendor organization, what's your view with regards to perhaps your customers' concern with the adoption of IoT, creating additional risk to the organization as a whole? Perhaps you can share with us your experience, especially when talking to customers.
Right. Thanks, Onji. For us, the biggest headache that our customers have faced is actually in the identification of responsibility, because from from a policy or from an agency point of view, we may see things in a very clear light, but on the ground, you start to realize that a single project can be an accumulation of 100 different stakeholders, right? The hardware, even the hardware component itself can be, from different manufacturer, different vendors. Then we talk about the software, then we talk about the platform as a service underlying that. Then we talk about the connectivity to other systems in order for the information to be transmitted. So every single part of it is actually exposed to certain risk, and not every part of it you may have the capability to protect. So in the industry point of view, it became very difficult to ascertain whenever something goes wrong, who should be responsible for it, just because of how difficult it is and how complex a single project can be. So some of the issues that our clients face includes, firstly, fragmenting all of these different things, ensuring that their supplier that they procure ascertain to certain standards, and that process itself may not always justify the cost, may not always justify the remuneration that they get from the project. So having all these security processes in place at times make a profitable project become not profitable, and they start to have this commercial feeling of, should I compromise a little bit on security measures so that I can't even start on this project itself? So I'm very excited to be on this panel to hear more about the different point of views, and we will definitely bring back some of the learnings to our clients as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. Now, just to follow up on what you shared, cutting corners from the security aspect is a common symptom that I see when the project is behind time. I mean, just recently, one of our clients' project, with regards to the original plan of allocating 2 to 3 weeks for security testing was shrank to 1 week. So you're right, especially when it comes to projects when there's a overrun in the schedule, the first sacrificial lamb is typically the security, right? And we do see this quite common across all industry. Now, moving to our second point, how then do you think an organization can actually adopt IoT in a secure manner? Now, this time around, maybe let me start off with Zhe, right? From a vendor point of view, how would you advise your clients to adopt IoT in a more secure manner? Yeah, over to you, Zhe.
Right. For us, we specialize in secure information exchange. So we take care of our clients and their interaction with external party. So a very important point that we always put forth to the client is share as little as you can and make offline as much as you can. So we advise them to try not to expose too much data open to anybody to query against, to verify against. So most of our clients are in the business of ranging from supply chain to education to healthcare. They generally hold a lot of privacy data that is identifiable to individuals. So for them, when they collect this data, either through IoT or other means, they often store it at the raw value itself. And that, to me, is the first big mistake. So with a combination of different technologies, starting from hashing, that has allowed us to convert raw data, like my name, Zheng Wei, into alphanumericals that people cannot actually figure out what it comes from. So these hashes are actually irreversible. So taking that first step of converting all your raw data into hash data is a rather simple, but ironically not a well-practiced thing in the industry today. And then the second step is about adopting new technologies like the blockchain and other sort of decentralized ledger technology, where you are able to put up authentication of your records without having exposing the data to a third party. So we allow our clients to issue documents and data where any third party can query against decentralized network to ensure the authenticity without having to touch their database through any endpoint itself. So this ring fences our clients' database and documents such that at any point of time, even if there is a compromise, it is at the document level. So if the integrity of the document is compromised, you get access to that single document the other side of the business are all protected. So with a mix of storing data in a hash manner as well as ring-fencing our databases through using decentralized database, decentralized ledgers as a mean of authentication, we have helped our clients actually solve quite a bit of security issues.
Thank you, Selman. Interesting point, because I think all of us know blockchains are typically using distributed ledger technology. So putting private data on blockchain is pretty interesting. So perhaps let me follow up with Marcus. Marcus coming from a user organization. So what's your view about your organization or any organization in general? What advice would you give them to adopt IoT in a secure manner? Marcus, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Unji. For organizations, I think cybersecurity should be looked at holistically. Okay, meaning short form PPT, which stands for the people, the process, and technology. So remember that without proper security awareness among the employees, without a well thought out organization security policies and process in place, technology alone can only do so much. So we have to focus on all these three areas: people, process, and technology. So whenever you have IoT devices connected to your company network, be it OT or IT, I think the security of such devices must be considered in your organization overall security strategy planning. And do not just use the price as the sole decision factor in your purchase. Think about the manufacturer's ability to support the IoT devices, such as firmware updates to patch security vulnerabilities over the life cycle of the product, like what my fellow panelist Kelvin has mentioned earlier. Consider buying new products that have better security features to replace your very old legacy IoT products, which may still be working, but may also have serious security vulnerabilities. They are discovered and unpatched, waiting to be exploited by threat actors. And of course, practice basic security hygiene, like not to use a simple and easy to guess password. Keep the firmware in your devices updated. Have a visibility of all the devices, all including IoT devices that are connected to your network. Open only the required network ports in the device, and having a different username and passwords for different user roles. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. I think it's quite interesting. You mentioned that we should include IoT devices in enterprise risk assessment, because to date I have seen a number of clients who have done the enterprise risk assessment or the cybersecurity risk assessment, and IoT devices were confidently left out. Right. So I think you raised an interesting point. Now, over to Kelvin. Right, from a regulator standpoint or viewpoint, what advice will you give to corporate entities, organizations in the pursuit or in the adoption of IoT devices?
Yeah, Kelvin here. Yeah. What we have done is that under that framework which we took on 2019, and recently, just last year 2020, probably it's a COVID period. Maybe a lot will not be aware, but CSA have launched the Cybersecurity Labelling Scheme for consumer smart devices as part of the effort to improve the IoT security and raising the overall cyber hygiene level to secure Singapore cyberspace. As mentioned previously by the panel, there's a lot of IoT devices in the cyberspace, so this is the first one that we want to tackle. And this CLS scheme is the first of the kind in Asia Pacific, and under this scheme, smart devices will be rated according to the level of cybersecurity provisioning. This will enable consumer to identify the products with the better cybersecurity provision and make informed decision. The key here is this multi-level cybersecurity provisioning. We are trying to raise the cyber hygiene, but we do not want to make, there's a lot of inflation. We do not want to inflate all the costs for this adoption. And the maturity of the industry, we also need to be more cognizant. So we raise it into the 4-level CLS, which the lowest level, entry level type of smart devices that consumer will use frivolously, that probably is just making sure no password, default password are used, firmware are updated. These are some of the basic self-declared level. But to a level 4, like let's say it's our trace together token or a router, these are something that we are taking a look at. And these are some of the devices that's at CLS 4 level. So in the whole, actually, we work with IMDA, our sister agency, and actually first introduced that Wi-Fi router is actually one of the key things that is guarding the house in terms of the gateway. So on that onwards, actually, IMDA have issued a regulation to actually say that actually all routers need to be certified at CLS level. At international front, we are also collaborating with a lot of countries. I'm very happy to say that, in fact, we are quoted by the US to mention in the executive order that they should look at Singapore CLS scheme to follow up, especially with all these cyber attacks. We have actually worked with Finland to have an MOU so that actually there's a mutual recognition in terms of all this labeling scheme to make sure any manufacturer come to us is not only for Singapore. Whatever we make in Singapore is also transferable there. And there's a lot of interest from UK, US into such scheme. So overall, I think actually this is the way how we are actually trying to uplift and regulate the industry from the governance approach. And slowly, based on consumer and enterprise choice of adopting different level of cybersecurity hygiene, that's where they are concerned about what sort of cybersecurity threat they are undergoing and what sort of level that meet their demand to protect themselves. So these are some of the ideas that we are going upstream to make sure at international level and manufacturing level, there's choice of cybersecurity hygiene practice to be considered over there. So this is the way. I'm very glad that actually this panel, for example, someone did mention about they are looking at ways to make sure security by design approach in terms of making sure privacy of data and all these are taken in place. So it's good that actually we are seeing that the whole industry, as I mentioned, the second part is the ecosystem. The ecosystem need to be there to keep on carrying on this load of actually helping the industry to be better and be aware of what need to be protected. Yeah. That end, pass over.
Thank you, Kevin. Now, perhaps I'd like to raise one clarifying question on behalf of the audience. Which CRS level would you actually recommend for corporate entities to go for when shortlisting potential IoT products? You mentioned there are 4 levels, but from CSA viewpoint, which level will you recommend? I assume level 1 is not recommended for corporate users, right? So, Kevin, perhaps you can elucidate, help us to understand better. Is there a recommended level from CSA point of view for corporate users?
Yeah. Okay. Just from that point of view, the simple example is that I myself was involved in the COVID system task force that we built together with GovTech and the whole of government in putting all this. So things like what level really we need to baseline ourselves, especially when we think that actually sensitive user information is potentially captured or able to identify. I think this is one of the big risks that being responsible for managing user data. So that is one big area that we look at. And second big area is that what is the consequences and impact to the whole system by leaking such information? Is it a reputation loss, monetary loss to the organization, or from there onwards, does it mean that the whole organization can't provide such services because they got no more reputation to work on all these things, or the whole service is down? So these are some of the considerations. So at minimum, we are looking at for enterprises should be about level 3 and level 4. Why do we think so? Is that because level 3 already start injecting things like you must have third-party testing to make sure black box penetration testing is done, and there's a time bound in making sure things are in order, so continuous improvement. 4th level, it will be a white box penetration testing in terms of making sure things are really drilled down right into the depth to make sure things are really done properly. So this is the kind of approach that we are looking at.
Thank you, Kevin. Now, yeah, thank you very much. Now, I'd like to perhaps invite Doug to perhaps share with us briefly on any advice on Interpol with regards to organization adopting IoT in a secure manner. Over to you, Doug.
Thank you. Look, the job of a CISO in organisations now is not as easy as it used to be. Back in the 80s, when I first got into the information technology space, everything was hardwired. It was pretty much confined to an environment that was controlled by the organisation with security and access just to the buildings, let alone getting access to the IT systems. And I think the complexities of the environments have radically changed since the outbreak of COVID too, particularly with the work from home. And people are actually using their own environments to obviously connect into corporate systems. And I guess the role of the CISO and the security of organisations has expanded beyond the precincts of the corporate office and environments through to the homes of employees and the like. So very, very difficult to manage, very, very difficult to think through the challenges and risks around that environment, but it's important that they're considered and systems and processes are put in place to protect the integrity of the information contained within organisations. And as mentioned, the reputation and a whole range of other potential regulatory issues for organisations for a significant breach or an exploitation of these IoT devices. I think one thing too is we've got manufacturers that are responsible for the delivery of these devices, and quite often there are backdoor accesses for these manufacturers to be able to support and upgrade firmware and the like. Organisations need to understand who has access to that device, because dare I say it, it can be exploited. And one of our biggest threats, has been mentioned, is our people factor. And whether that people factor is within the organisation the IoT device is deployed in, or it's extended to the people of the manufacturers as well. So organisations need to be very conscious of what the device is, who has access to that device, how it's maintained, how it's upgraded. It's quite a very complex and very challenging issue to think through. And you really need to manage and be conscious of that risk and ensure that there's protections and considerations made as part of your day-to-day operational activities.
Okay, thank you, Doug. So, thank you to all the 4 panelists, sharing with us your valuable insights on this topic. Again, just for the benefit of the audience, just want to share with you that in Singapore context, there are 2 guidance documents that you may want to refer to while adopting IoT in a secure manner. One of them is the Singapore Technical Reference 64 that was published in 2018. The title is the Guideline for IoT Security for Smart Nation. I believe the technical reference is chargeable. You have to pay for it. Now, alternatively, you can actually look at a free document for IMDA, the IoT Cyber Security Guide 2020 that was released by IMDA 2 years back. So for organizations who are looking to adopting IoT in a secure manner, I would highly recommend you refer to these 2 documents for guidance and so on, for what I call it, internal reference to selecting suitable IoT products. Now, we are perhaps down to our last point for our discussion for today. And I'll perhaps go through a quick fire round to every panelist. Now, the pertinent question that is perhaps on the mind of all the audience today is, given all the risks that we keep hearing about the use of IoT devices, and in actual fact, in 2020, there's a case where it was published in the news that more than 50 digital camera users were hacked, and video recordings of the compromised video cams were actually sold online, and quite a significant number of those videos sold are actually from Singapore. So in a quick fire way, perhaps let me start off with Marcus and then ending with Zheng. What would you recommend? What is tips that you recommend to a user at home, how they can secure themselves quickly and immediately when they are adopting IoT products? Let me start off with Marcus then.
Okay, thanks, Unchi. I think for consumers, consider getting products that are CLS certified. what Kelvin has mentioned. I mean, that's a sort of a minimum. Replace your legacy old products with those new ones with better security features. Number two, make sure your firmware in your devices are updated. Yeah, because what is secure today may not be secure tomorrow. And technology, access to technologies is not only restricted to defenders like us, but also to the attackers, the threat actors. And also finally, price is important. I understand that, but don't use that as a sole decision factor. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Next over to Kelvin then. Any quick tips for the home user?
Yeah, I think thanks everyone. I think Marcus did talk about my CLS scheme from CSA. So very happy that that's the first thing that you must go out as a consumer. Look out for CLS labeling scheme. In fact, when we design this scheme, it's just 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, and 4 star. So it's very recognizable. By buying a box and look at the sticker, how many stars you go. I think more star is better. So that's the impression, easily able to give people the right perception. So in fact, choose a CLS product. Second thing that I want to say is that even we can protect you from firmware or this level, in the end, it's up to you on the password. Make sure you practice good password. That's very important. So that actually, that's the first level of protection. If we can protect you, but actually you got to put a weak password, that is the bad thing to do. Third point is actually, you must look at it in terms of holistically, not to be actually scammed by somebody, because there's a lot of scam out there after all the OCBC affair. So if someone is tricking you from a device angle, telling you certain thing not right, and you must give up your password and all these things, even you have locked all your door, don't give the key. So this is very important. Don't let your guards down. That's all from me. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelvin. Thank you for sharing the people element, right? Despite all the high security locks that you can put in place, if the scammers can easily trick you out from your credentials, right? You'll be losing the key to the kingdom. Now over to Doug. Any quick tips for the home users?
Oh, look, I think Marcus and Kelvin did a pretty good job capturing most mine. It comes down to risk, really, and really balancing that, how much risk is an individual willing to give up to obviously get that next IoT device. I really sort of think from my perspective, not many people actually change their passwords on their routers at home, and then we're asking them to just set passwords for their IoT device. They're very excited about unwrapping it and plugging it in and getting it going, and they're not thinking about the implications and the challenges around that. So, buyer beware. If you're going down to certain areas in Singapore, and I don't want to name them specifically, and there's something that's really cheap that's an IoT device, think before you purchase. So I'll leave that with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. Now, last but not least, Zhenwei, please share with us what tips would you offer to a home user?
On top of what the other panelists have shared, I think consumers should change their mindset and start looking at how you can control and own your own data. So that allows you to actually ring fence yourself from other people that might be compromised, right? We see a lot of connected things whereby somebody else's device being compromised. In the end, that caused you to be compromised. Imagine your neighbor has a connecting door to you, and then the neighbor gets broken in because he gave the key away, and you get that as well. So it's all about owning your own data, protect yourself, and very glad to have this panel session.
Okay, thank you, Zhenwei. Again, many thanks to all the 4 esteemed panelists we have today. I hope the rest of the audience would enjoy the rest of the IoT Asia conference. And again, I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting us to share our insights in this panelist. And thank you very much and have a good day. Bye.